Hi everybody and welcome to Dye Time. In this episode of Dye Time I am going to be attempting to over dye this yarn again. I tried over dyeing this commercially dyed yarn and you can see the outside of it dyed quite nicely, but if you look inside this cake there is no dye there whatsoever. So what I've done now is, this is a fresh soda ash bath that I have put this in, and it's been soaking in there for about 24 hours now. And I'm going to just plop it in there. Don't know how much water I'm actually going to need. I think I'm going to get rid of some of that water. That's better. The water is covering the yarn, but there's not loads of water there. Now last time I dyed this with dark brown fibre reactive dye from Dharma, and so I'm going to do the same again. This is just cold tap water with nothing in it. I am not measuring out how much. I'm just going to put enough in to make the water look like the colour I want it to be. I probably should have done this in a jug first and then poured it in there, because there are lots of lumps of dye. There we go. Now I have my mask on and I do have my gloves on as well. I'm just going to dry this off, and I think I'm going to add just a tiny bit more in there. And make sure my spoon is nice and dry. I don't want to introduce any moisture into my powder dye. So I'm just putting a tiny bit more in. Give it a nice mix up. Now this dye is made of different pigments, and just by wiping my spoon on this, you can see it's broken into some of those yellows. Have a little look on the side there. That's some of the powder dye which is broken into the reds and yellows and blues that it's made of. It is gorgeous. I'm hoping we'll get a little bit of speckling on this yarn, but the overall intent is to get it brown, and hopefully there'll be a nice brown fade from the outside to the inside. And now, since this is a cotton-based, well, it's a plant-based yarn and fibre reactive dye, all this now needs is time. So I'm just going to leave this for probably 48 hours and just hope that some of this dye takes to the yarn this time. This has been sitting for about 48 hours now. Fingers crossed that some of this dye has bounced to the yarn. I mean, it's looking good, but last time it looks good as well, and then it all washed out. So I'm just going to give this a little bit of a rinse under some cold tap water, because there is dye coming out. That is to be expected with fibre reactive dyes and cotton. As you saw, there was still lots of dye in that water. It doesn't exhaust in the same way as acid dyes and animal fibres. So I'm just giving this a little bit of a rinse, and I think that'll do for now, just to get most of that dye out. And now I'm just going to let this sit and try and dry at least a little bit before I can wind this into a skein, and then I can dry it properly. I don't want to wind it now because it will end up stretching the cotton, and if you ever have yarn that's in a tangle, wait until it is dry before you untangle it. Trying to untangle wet yarn is a recipe for disaster. I let this dry for a couple of days, but since it is November, I didn't think it was going to dry completely, so I very carefully wound it into a skein, and now I'm just soaking it in some cool water with some washing up liquid. A lot more dye has bound to this yarn than before, but cotton does need a lot of washing, and I think there's still going to be quite a bit more colour coming out of this. So the way I wash cotton, oh god, that's a tangle already, is just to let it soak in some cool tap water with some washing up liquid. And I'll just change this water randomly for probably the next few hours. I'll probably let it sit overnight as well, and then once the water is clear, or as clear as I can get it, I can hang it up to dry. And you can see there is still some dye coming off, but not as much as there was. So hopefully this won't actually take too long. Sometimes cotton does take a long time to wash, but this is the best way that I have found of doing it. This way works for me. And here is the finished dyed yarn. Now this has more dye on it than the last time, so I think this was a success. You can see on this side there's a few strands which have got a fair bit of dye on it, so that would have been on the outside. And then we come to this side of the skein, and you can see there's not really anything there. If we have a look at an undyed skein of yarn, you can see it's pretty similar. Tiny bits of dye might have been able to get through, but not really that much. But if you compare it to that side, then yes, the outside definitely got more dye than the inside, which is what we expected, as this was in a cake form. Now what I really like, as I was winding this, I noticed, oh, there's a pink speck right there, and there's some yellow specks. I did see blue specks. Where are those blue specks? I did see them, but there are blue specks running through this as well. There's quite a lot of yellow I'm noticing. If you look on that side, oh, there's some nice colour coming through as well. But again, the outside dyed really well. Well, I say dyed really well. It's not the dark brown that I was expecting, but that is probably because I dyed this in a jar full of dye rather than hand painting. If I had hand painted this, the dye there'd have been a lot more concentration of dye on parts on the yarn, so that then more dye would have been able to bind to the yarn, which I'm thinking I might do with this skein of yarn. I've dyed it twice. Why not dye it a third time? Another experiment. I might try hand painting the dark brown on this, see how that dyes. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to hand paint this. I'm going to leave it in this skein, and I'm going to go soak it now. And yeah, I will hand paint this with dark brown. Let's see how many times I can dye this skein of cotton yarn before it is completely black and I cannot dye it anymore. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Do please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought of this experiment. If you know why the dye bounds better this time than last time, again, please let me know. And if there are any experiments that you would like to see me do in the future, please leave a comment, and I do keep note of all these suggestions. And my notebook is getting full, but I do pull from those suggestions when I create my new videos. I publish a new video every Monday around about 6 p.m. UK time, and I do like to experiment with different dyes, fibre types, techniques. I like to mix up things. I like to try making things different, and I do often pull from ideas that people have given me in the past. So there should always be something new and interesting to watch. Thank you so much for watching.